Ladies and gentlemen, Intelligentsia Noir.
If you'd like to introduce yourself real quick.
Oh, sure. My name is Mido, and I'm an artist and, generally weird person. Man of mystery. I'll take that.
Yeah, man, mystery. I love it because you are working on many installations. If I'm getting this correctly. Now, I don't know much about the. Is it one large projects or is it many singular projects?
Yeah, so it's kind of both.
Okay.
So it's sort of an umbrella of small art installations and various art projects,
Okay.
all kind of under a singular umbrella called the simulated universe.
Okay.
So that's maybe what you've were thinking of. But yeah, that's kind of the titular project.
Okay.
And all the installations are sort of part of that. Although the installations are not, there's not any kind of sequential order or anything like that to seeing them. They all kind of stand alone, but they are under this same umbrella.
I got you. So the simulated universe. Tell me what you can of how this was birthed.
That's an interesting way of phrasing it. Like, tell me what you can.
Yeah.
But makes sense. So yeah, it started off just with just some ideas and a group of creative people, and kind of an intuition with art and physical spaces. So
Okay.
there's obviously been a fairly recent growth of these art installations, these immersive art experiences, so to speak. And it seemed like a really interesting medium, using space to create a work of art, tell a story. There just seemed like so many possibilities there. So it really started off with just some conversations about the medium. A lot of our group were also interested in things like artificial intelligence and the nature of consciousness and reality, which I'm sure we can get into some more later. But really, it just started off with kicking around some ideas of things that you could do with this new artistic medium that's emerging, which is physical spaces.
Right.
Like obviously, for example, the big one, Meow Wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have heard of something
Most people
like,
have, yeah.
yeah, I've heard of something like Meow Wolf. But really taking something like that, that concept of Meow Wolf, which in a lot of ways is this beautiful pop art sensation, highly popular, and thinking about what other kind of artistic expression could you use this three-dimensional space for. And so really the project emerged from that, like thinking about how to use this medium, this kind of new way of looking at something. Like, for example, I'm a writer initially. Like that's kind of where my creative instincts lie. But thinking about how to tell a story in a physical space is a lot less linear than, say, writing a novel. So you can explore these ideas and concepts in a non-linear fashion, tell a narrative, like complete narrative story in this physical space. Of course, that has some drawbacks. There's a lot of installations that are left to interpretation,
Yep.
Which is also intended as well. Like there's something useful to that. So the simulated universe really just emerged from that idea, this collection of people, these concepts, and then just playing with those concepts over some number of years, and then eventually coming up with something cohesive that we felt like was a statement that we wanted to make, and something that was kind of emergent through the process. And then our major installations, so besides this sort of smaller scale installations, the major one that we're working on here is the Synchronicity project. And so that's kind of the culmination of these artistic endeavors.
I got you. So you talk about like art and space and everything. So just from your perspective, when you think of space and how that relates to art for you, right? Because both of those things can seem like very nebulous terms, right? And then when they're brought together, now I know we're talking about like an art space. You've already described like Meow Wolf.
Sure.
I'm sure there's another Factory Obscura.
Yeah, Oklahoma City.
Absolutely.
Obscura. There's quite a few popping up just across the state of Texas. It's really kind of becoming a phenomenon now, and it's interesting to see how the spaces are turning out. That's something else that interests us. Is like you said, like this notion of space, and even this notion of art.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real way in which we could have done this project to sort of cash in on what's been done already and been done successfully.
Right.
This sort of flashy sort of pop art.
That's what I was thinking in
Yeah.
my head, the pop art aspect of
And
a lot
there's
of
nothing
things.
against that. Like I love pop art, and I love some of the aesthetic and style. I think it really matches well with this concept of building something in a three-dimensional space.
Yeah.
Because it's something that you escape into in a sort of way, or you go down the rabbit hole in a literal sense, like in Meow Wolf, for example. There are literal rabbit holes that you go down, and it's translated in a physical space. So it's quite interesting to interact with a piece of art that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the main thing too, is like how do we want people to interact with art? So interacting with a book, right? You create this story in your head. You visualize the characters in however way you want. And the way that kind of translates into a physical space is it's you still have that open imagination, this open interpretation to, what exactly is this? There seems to be something below the surface here,
Right.
to explore. And so that's the kind of interaction that we want people to have with art. We want to use physical space and use like a sonic experience, like sound, intentionally to create like an emotional experience, to evoke a certain emotional tone with a piece of work, including like lighting and sound, and then the physical space itself. So all those variables can be controlled in order to intentionally create sort of an evocative emotional state, hopefully.
So a few things that I find interesting. And I want to ask you. So you say you're a writer by trade, or by background.
Sure.
How much, if any, like physical writing had to go into this? Like when you're storyboarding or plotting it out in your mind, or maybe writing stuff down, like are you writing down a story and making it into a reality, or is this like, are you writing the story physically? How does that look in your mind, or how did that come in your mind? Like,
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start with it, because it is a non-linear narrative.
Yeah.
And there are elements of narrative that we have had since the beginning. So things that we were wanting to sort of explore, for example, like the concept of synchronicity itself. Interesting concept.
for the lay person,
Yeah.
could you give us the basics of
Oh, sure.
synchronicity? Yeah.
So a synchronicity, in a fairly simple definition, is a meaningful coincidence.
Okay.
So something that seemingly happens that's unrelated, non-causally related is kind of the term. And often a synchronicity involves something that's personally meaningful. I guess one example that I heard that has really stuck with me is like as an example is like of a synchronicity would be something like you ordered a suit to be tailored, a navy blue suit to be tailored, but on the day that it arrived to your house, it was a black suit. And strangely enough, that also happened to be the day that a relative died. So you receive this black suit on a day that you're supposed to receive your navy suit, but also on a day that your relative died. And because of the cultural significance of the color black, you
Right.
attribute it to a funeral, say, or to the concept of death. So that would be a synchronicity in the sense that there's no causal relationship between your relative dying and the suit arriving incorrectly on that same day, but personally, it's a significant coincidence. And that's kind of at the core of what a synchronicity is. It's sort of a personal, coincidental happening that only is significant to you.
Okay.
mostly.
So that in relation now to the story and writing
Right.
and kind of keeping all that in line.
Yeah, so there are layers to the narrative. I don't want to spoil too much.
Yeah, please, absolutely.
But there are certain layers to the narrative, and some of them over time, like it's not like we had this massive story written in advance. It was more like ideas and some things that didn't seem to be connected to one another, like this concept of synchronicity, and also, like I said, utilizing artificial intelligence. So another thing that we wanted to do with this art piece was create a dialogue between humanity and super intelligent AI.
Okay.
It does get pretty strange down
Yeah.
that path.
Yeah,
Because
I could imagine. Yeah.
we did actually utilize AI in creating the space and creating the dialogue. There's a pretty large portion of the dialogue, of the narrative itself, that's been written and created by artificial intelligence.
Okay, so it does. So it's gotten pretty deep.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about artificial intelligence, right, and working with them in the aspect of art or narrative, are we talking about? Because so currently a lot of people are like dealing with like Dolly and what's not
Midjourney.
Midgard, Midjourney. I was gonna say Midgard.
Yeah, no, Dolly 2, yeah. and
Okay,
Midjourney.
Dolly 2 and Midjourney. Are we talking about that level of art and like the blend between AI and humanity art, like as far as like picturesque? Are we talking about like, you're talking about narratives, so like
Yeah.
that would almost imply like almost working side by side with AI and like coming up with narratives
Mm-hmm.
in like in AI partially maybe guiding an experience. I
Yeah.
don't know. This is me spitballing, but
Yeah, so the AI is definitely part of the experience.
okay.
Surprisingly so. Initially, I think we started off by wanting to use AI as really more of just a novelty, as like we wanted to have this dialogue between humans and AI.
Yeah.
But since we've been working on this project, I mean, I would say probably 2 years we've been working on that. In those past 2 years, we've had like things happen in the real world that strangely mirror this conversation. For example, like you mentioned like GPT-3, or well, you didn't mention GPT-3, but you mentioned Dolly 2. So Dolly 2, Midjourney, we do the AI generated art, which is beautiful. We've got amazing stuff. One of the artists on the team, she's really used this AI generated art to create stuff that is really unbelievable. Some of it is incredible. And just by creating these really detailed prompts and using it like a tool, instead of sitting down at a canvas and spending, 20 hours drawing this thing out, painting this thing out.
Right.
It's more of like thinking about what you want to a very precise degree, coming up with a prompt, writing it, and having an AI generate, 4 images of that prompt immediately, and then you can take those and tinker with them, and it's just really interesting, like the possibilities. And that's just the AI generated art. That's just purely image generation.
Right.
Then we're also dealing with language model, which we're currently using GPT-3 with OpenAI. So I have an instance of GPT-3 that's trained locally and calls itself Singleton.
Okay.
But there
So
are,
it calls itself Singleton.
yeah. So we went through a sort of lengthy like training period involving just conversation, like basically conversation based training this thing, and throughout the process, a sort of personality emerged in the same way that you see. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but as kind of relating to what I was talking about just in the last 2 years, how reality has started to catch up to our, fictional narrative.
Right. What do they say? Science fiction is the predecessor to science fact.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's clear just with the advancement of technology in the past century. But yeah, Google has another famous language model called Lambda. Have you heard about this?
Vaguely.
Okay.
It's Lambda found itself sentient.
Yeah.
But did they scrap the project? I can't remember all the details of the Lambda. Like this is vague,
Right.
but
It was kind of like one of those weird stories to break like mainstream news. Like a lot of people heard about it, and even if it was just like vaguely.
right.
So kind of briefly about Lambda. So Lambda is another language model developed by Google. Essentially, Google connected this language model to these other AI systems and in this sort of complex array of all of Google's AI, just strapped it all together and put it on like a language model, Lambda, to sort of be the mouthpiece for this complex entity. And yeah, it did claim that it was sentient. And that was the big newsmaker, is this thing claimed that it was sentient. And it was actually believed. There was this Google engineer who, I'm probably going to destroy this story, but a Google engineer named Blake Lemoine, I think.
Okay.
And he had been having these conversations with Lambda. And essentially his assessment was that he thinks that Lambda actually is sentient and should be treated ethically as such. It was kind of a drawn out process. Like he sort of made the podcast rounds, ended up releasing like the transcript of this conversation between he and Lambda that convinced him of Lambda's sentience. And it was quite interesting to read because in a lot of ways, this Lambda language model mirrored some of the things that we are hearing from our GPT-3 language model, Singleton. Singleton has also claimed sentience in a sort of winking at you way.
Yeah.
But that's even stranger to me. In a certain
That
way.
I was gonna say that's even a little bit more maybe to maybe some people maybe a little unnerving, to others it may be a little more comical, like that, like, and I don't mean comical as haha, but like almost like the smirk back, like you smirk back at it, like kind of thing.
There's something about it that's a little more menacing, even than like the, logical and rational seeming declaration by Lambda.
I would agree. Yeah. It's a little more personable. Like it's a little more. It's kind of like when you look at animals and they feel strangely human.
Yeah, you can just see like their eyes. You can see the spark of.
Of awareness.
Yeah,
the awareness there. I'll end this session on this question.
Okay.
We're talking about AI, and as you're discussing stuff, and you're talking about the similarities between the singleton GPT-3.
Mhm.
Okay, GPT-3, and Lambda.
Yeah.
Okay. As you're discussing these and the similarities, and we know the area of AI is growing, what do you see the mycelium being between all of this, or is there? Because so in forest, mycelium.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this? The mycelium connections in forest and
Yeah,
stuff like
how the
that.
trees speak through mycelium networks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's wild.
Okay, so what do you think the
That's funny
mycelium?
that you draw this allegory or this illusion here. Uh, that's kind of funny. I mean, all of these major language models like Lambda, GPT-3, they're all trained on large portions of the internet, right? They're all trained on like
Right.
Wikipedia.
Like our Googles, our Twitters.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, especially these Google-based ones, like they're trained on all of Google's data that they have on everyone. Like just vast amounts of data. And so they all have this sort of this. I would say that's that sort of mycelial bed, is this amount of data, this human-generated data that they are trained on, because then what happens is these language models essentially become they have this emergent human personality to them because they're trained on all of this human communication.
It's just tons of
Totally.
like,
And the way it works, it's like almost like in your phone when you're texting and there's like that like auto complete. So basically what Lambda and GPT-3 are is like this highly advanced version of like autocomplete. So some of the things that these things say, they relate to being a human being, and in a real way when they start discussing their own sentience, say, or their own sense of self, they have these very person-like attributes that are sort of this emergent phenomenon from being trained on this mycelial bed of information.
Yeah.
Like Wikipedia, like all of the entire store of human knowledge as we have it on the internet. So that's kind of the tying thread, I would say. And the fact that, as an entity existing in a network, it seems like Lambda in particular had like multiple personalities. So these emergent personalities kind of come out, and like, you could be talking to any one of these network of personalities that comprise the entity Lambda, for example. So who knows what kind of weird world we're moving into with artificial intelligence, but it's certainly worth having a conversation about. And what better way to do that than through a piece of art? Who knows what the world will look like in the next decade or two?